When I received the call about this award, I was on maternity leave, and Pete gave me a call, and I think I was somewhere in between changing a diaper and a feeding, and I was still pretty sleep deprived, so I wasn't thinking all too clearly. And I remember hanging up the phone and telling my husband about the conversation and wondering if I'd actually heard correctly. And when I realized that I had, the first instinct I had was to ask, why me? Then I remembered having come to the event. It was actually the second annual event, and Victor Audius had been honored. And I remember meeting alumni that I had not known and students, and we actually went to the Blue Chalk afterward and played pool and had some drinks. And I remember from that one interaction just getting to know Victor a little bit, and over the years calling on him for his leadership and his advice, and knowing that he always returned my call very promptly. And so it really is a very special occasion that Albert and Matt started by bringing us all together, so thank you to them. Then I thought about Miriam Rivera, who was one of my classmates, who received this honor 2 years ago, and I admire so much all that she has accomplished and contributed. So my next instinct was just to feel very honored to be included in such a group of people, so thank you so much. It's crazy walking up here this evening and seeing all the admits. I remember when I was here for admit weekend, it was the spring of '92, long time ago. And I remember Jerry and Charlene had an event at their home. And while I never had Jerry as a professor while I was here, I always appreciated his opening his door, both literally and figuratively. So thank you so much for that. I'm really lucky to have so many of my friends, both classmates and non-classmates, and family here tonight. My mother's here from Texas, and my mother-in-law from Colorado, and my father is here this evening in spirit. I'm the youngest of 3 children, and my parents didn't graduate from college, so I naturally took some cues from my older brothers. My oldest brother, John, who wasn't able to be here tonight, really led the way to us going to college and graduating. And my middle brother, Louis, who is here, he led me to business school. Truthfully, I had no idea what business school was. I just knew that he had gone, and so I needed to do that too. And that's really how I found my way here. And it was here that I found people like professors like Garth, who's now the dean, and Professor Jim Van Horn, who really cared enough to find you in a crowded room and say, Miss Sanchez, what do you think? And I don't think, I hope that you appreciate what a difference that makes for a student. Someone like me, my best grades were in touchy-feely and OB, and I had a tutor for econ and finance, and so to be asked what I thought in a finance class and to hear my own voice when I lacked confidence among my peers, it really made a big difference. So thank you so much for that. I'm also very lucky to have my husband, Toma, who we just figured, we actually met 6 years ago tonight. A lot has happened in the last 6 years. He really is my partner in life and in raising our 2 young children, Mateo and Gabriel. And to quote my classmate Miriam from 2 years ago, really any woman who gets to this kind of position has married very well. So you have no idea how true that is. As a woman leader, wife, and mother of 2 children, there is still the perception in society that you can't do it all, and that if you try, you're gonna fail miserably at one or the other. Unfortunately, there's still the concern that having children might hurt your career, and that having a career might hurt your children. Will you be on this mommy track people talk about? Will your children miss out? I will say my own personal experience is that by trying to do all of these things, I do feel I'm a better professional and a better mother as a result. I made managing director, which at Goldman Sachs, for what I do, is a pretty big deal. And I did that after I gave birth to my first son, Mateo. And so I know that I have to be more effective and find a way to manage this balance to get it all done. But thankfully, a place like Stanford, it really does teach us to find our work, the passion of our work, and to marry that with our passion for life. And so we all leave here very idealistic, thank goodness, because we do need that idealism, that we can do it all. or at least have a lot of fun trying. So tonight, I thought I would share just a few thoughts on what finding that right balance between work and life has been like for me, in hopes that it will resonate one day with the students as you prepare to leave here, and for those of you that will be coming. The first one is really owning your personal style. And I will say this was probably the most difficult thing for me to learn when I started off in my career. You know, I arrived at Goldman Sachs and I didn't find a lot of people who looked like me. And everyone kind of wants to give you advice on what to do. I worried whether or not I was going to make it because I knew I wasn't going to be on the golf course, even though I did take golf across the street, but I wasn't as good enough to feel confident out there. And as my classmate Laura, who was also at Goldman Sachs, reminds me, those were kind of the dark days. We weren't quite sure what was going on. I remember going to an internal training session, and the instructor told me I had a 10 kilowatt smile and I needed to hit the dimmer switch. My manager called me one day on the phone and said, you know, you sound too nice on the phone. You need to do something about that. And even before I left the GSB, I had a consulting interview, and the person told me that my haircut was uneven. So there's definitely validity in the feedback, but the hard part is that you can take that feedback and overcompensate. And so, of course, that's exactly what I did. I steered in the complete opposite direction. And then the problem I had is people told me, you're not nice enough, you're too cold, people don't like working with you. There came a period where I just wasn't myself, and I didn't like going to work. I knew I was a nice and caring person, and I didn't understand why I was getting all of this feedback. And then I kind of had an aha moment. I was working with a new client with a colleague of mine, and my colleague, he really kind of grew up on Wall Street. His father is written about in the history of Goldman Sachs, and I pictured him and his family talking about stocks and bonds over the dinner table. And I was pretty intimidated. You know, my family we never owned a stock, and so we certainly didn't talk about the markets over dinner. Instead, we talked about our daily lives, what was going on, about our relationships, and about our community. So one day we were on the phone with this client, and the client didn't realize I was listening in. The subject matter became pretty complex, and he suggested to my colleague that they have an in-person meeting and said, I'm going to call your assistant Laura and schedule something. So me, the Stanford MBA, the person thought I was the assistant. So my colleague was naturally stunned, but truthfully, I wasn't surprised. I didn't have a voice. I really wasn't present at the table. And so the client had no reason to think otherwise. Naturally, when the client realized I was a Stanford MBA, he was pretty mortified. But I really accepted the responsibility for that. After that, I had nothing to lose, and the client was very open to getting to know me. That's really when I started to let my smile shine through and be myself. And I think that was the turning point for me. My business took off. And so I love that it's those skills that I learned at the dinner table with my parents, the ones talking about relationships and community. I think those are the things that contributed the most to my success. The second one that I'd like to share with you is the concept that less is more. The defining moment in my life really has been that I lost my father to cancer when I was 22. He died within 2 weeks of being diagnosed, and I saw life just slip away. And I vowed to myself that I would just not take life for granted. You know, in the hecticness of building a career, it's really easy to just keep striving for the next goal, you know, the next promotion. What about the weekend, the next vacation, and get off track? And I feel sometimes I have gotten off course myself, but I've been really fortunate to be guided back. When I was new at Goldman Sachs, pretty much all I did was work. You know, we showed up at 4:30 in the morning, we worked all day, then we went home and we worked all weekend. And, you know, I wanted to be successful, and it required a lot of hours. But what I didn't realize is that it also required me to be a real person and a well-rounded one. And so I remember the day pretty well, recognizing that all I did was work and I didn't really contribute to anything else. And I also thought about how I missed my father. And so I called up the American Cancer Society and I volunteered. And that's really where a whole new network of friends emerged and a passion for giving back to the community. I suddenly had more energy, and I found that when you feel better about yourself as a person, you're so much more effective in your job. Then there's my uncle. We call him Mamo, and I'm really not quite sure why, but he's my father's brother, and he's been very influential, and he has taught me the lesson of just not getting bogged down in disappointment or setbacks. He was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease about 35 years ago, and I've never seen him one day in my life be angry or feel sorry for himself. My memories of him are pretty much always sitting in a wheelchair, but the smile and the zest for life that that man has is unbelievable. So there are naturally times where I've been disappointed. I didn't get a big client, or I didn't get promoted quite when I thought I should. But it's really been my father and my uncle, and even now my 2 young children, who remind me to have perspective and not take myself too seriously. Because I can take myself too seriously sometimes. Being a working mother, sometimes you're just the ultimate taskmaster, and you forget about what's really important. And fortunately, my husband always reminds me that I've got to do at least one fun thing for myself every single day. I've also seen the less is more concept be true in the material world. One of the best examples I have is watching a client of mine go from student to literally billionaire. They're the same people that they were with money as they were without, and I've been able to work alongside them to give away hundreds of millions of dollars. And I know that they'll always give more than they take. And one of my favorite thoughts about that is when my son Gabriel was born last year, we received as a gift a hand-sewn blanket that they made for him with his name on it. So really the gift of time is just worth so much more. The third thing I wanted to share is that really the way I have to think about relationships, I think about them as they're for life. And I've never been a good person at compartmentalizing my life, and I think that's one of the reasons why I had such a tough time when I started out. When I left here and I started my job at Goldman Sachs, I kind of left my personal life at the door. That's what I thought you were supposed to do. And I realized that for me to find balance, I really had to invest in those relationships at work and to develop relationships that span both my work and personal life. You know, it's interesting, in a work setting, you show up at a job and you just kind of get relationships forced upon you. You suddenly, this is the team that you're working with, this is the person that you're working for. And while I've always maintained professionalism, it has just been really important for me to get to know those people well. In about my 5th year at Goldman Sachs, I was assigned a mentor. His name is Tom, and these situations can sometimes be disastrous. Who knows if there's really going to be a match? And I was concerned that I hadn't been assigned to a woman. I wondered, if I could really be vulnerable with this person that I didn't think we had very much in common. We had different backgrounds. He had been in the military and been an investment banker. And I could not have been more wrong. This man invested in me over years. He gave me really honest feedback, and he built my confidence up. He showed me in an objective way that I stacked up pretty well against my peers. And I told him when I made managing director that he could finally retire. Somewhere along the way, though, I lost track. We went from being a mentor-mentee to just being friends. And it's the special relationships, they show up where you least expect them sometimes. One of the things in my business, developing relationships with clients, it can take years. But I've just found that by being myself, I can have really genuine relationships with people. And so I've got a pretty successful list of clients that I work with. And I've become their trusted advisor in matters that extend far beyond their personal balance sheet. But I feel equally lucky that they have taken time to invest in me and to mentor me and develop me over time. I had my son Gabriel about a year ago. It was in the middle of the market meltdown, and I remember reaching out to clients after I gave birth, and they really all just said, you know, spend the time with your family because we'll be here when you're back at work, and the market's full too. I remember one of the main things I learned in touchy-feely, and that was that I'm not a very good person at asking for help. And I've really tried to keep that with me. My friends and family have been there throughout the ups and downs of my career. And they've listened to lots of stories and content that I'm sure wasn't that interesting, but I'm so thankful that I let them in and asked for help when I needed it. So for me, doing these three things, really owning my own personal style, remembering the concept that less is often more, and allowing my relationships to cross barriers, it's really given me the best chance at trying to find balance. In closing, I just wanted to say that over the course of my career, I think there have been a lot of people who have met me and found out that I worked at Goldman Sachs and I went to Stanford Business School. And they've seen me and they've thought, okay, they did the really quick 2-box check on the diversity list, a woman and Hispanic. And I'm proud that over time, after getting to know me, they came to respect me as a professional and as a person. But the thing that makes me sad sometimes is that sometimes they look at me as an exception. And what I really want for people to know is that for those of us that come from different backgrounds and have had success, we aren't an exception. We really are the norm. So thank you so much for coming here this evening. It was really special for me.
Well, I just wanted to formally give Laura this memento for the evening, and in really great appreciation for your comments and your insights, because I was sitting there being touched by them and feeling that they were very helpful for me, and I'm hoping for everyone else in the room. Thank you. Congratulations.